Welcome back to the Mining Pod. On today's show, we're joined by Bob Bodily. He is the CEO of Bioniq. We brought him on the show to talk about Bitcoin rollups, the idea that you can scale a blockchain with another blockchain. This is great for Bitcoin miners because we'd have more applications on top of Bitcoin if we did have a rollup. There's a few different teams in the Bitcoin ecosystem working on this idea right now. We do not have a Bitcoin rollup design out there that could be implemented via BIP, but it is something that people should be aware of because it's possibly a route that Bitcoin goes down to secure more transactions on top of Bitcoin, build applications on top of Bitcoin, and more so. For Bitcoin miners, what this means is more transaction fees. What we've been seeing the last few weeks is a spike in transaction fees for Bitcoin miners, as much as double the block size of a typical Bitcoin reward. So if we have rollups, we might even have more of them in the future. It's definitely a great conversation, starting with the basics of it and moving all the way to the possible repercussions. So give it a listen. Quickly, go subscribe to our new newsletter as well. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers within the first month of the year. So go give that a subscription. It's blockspace.media. And then lastly, give a listen to our sponsor for this episode. Is your mining operation happening ready? Take control of your own future with the right energy strategy. Lincoin Energy Trading Platform is a tool used by miners to design, monitor, and seamlessly orchestrate sophisticated energy strategies within electricity markets such as ERCOT, New York, and PJM. Avoid penalties, participate in demand response programs, and capture hundreds of thousands of dollars per megawatt per year by deploying the right block and index strategy. Secure your competitive edge at lincoin.com. Are you a retail or institutional investor interested in Bitcoin mining companies? The Miner Mag brings you free data and analysis from all major NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin mining operations to know who stands out. Check out visualized metrics and data-dependent stories at theminermag.com. Welcome back to the Mining Pod. Today we're joined by Bob Bodily, CEO of Bioniq. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Will. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this conversation. Obviously, it's a mining podcast, so we talk mostly about Bitcoin mining. The things that interest me in Bitcoin mining, however, are definitely adjacent to Bitcoin mining. They have to do with layer 2 ideas for Bitcoin, which coming out of the woodwork now, and that's why we invite you on the show. And we're so excited for you joining us. I think they have to do with mining because mining is like the settlement layer for Bitcoin, right? So this is going to affect Bitcoin miners in some way, shape, form, or another. Including increasing fees or just increasing like the complexity of Bitcoin mining, or perhaps increasing the complexity of Bitcoin mining. So we'll dive into those topics. I think like the thing just to set the table here is first a bio, what you're working on, but second, let's get into like what's happening with Lightning right now and people's interest in some of these alternative Bitcoin innovations. But first to you for a quick bio.
Yeah, so I'm Bob Bodily, CEO of Bioniq. Bioniq is an Ordinals marketplace and launchpad. We're building currently on a Bitcoin sidechain called ICP. That's Internet Computer Protocol, mostly built by the Dfinity Foundation. And we're building on a Bitcoin sidechain because you can create really fantastic user experiences on ICP right now. It has a lot of really great Bitcoin primitives at the protocol layer, like a Bitcoin Light node running fully on chain on ICP. And you can do threshold signing. So you can sign Bitcoin transactions, and there's wrapped Bitcoin as well. So kind of all the pieces that you need to build a really great, fast, low fee Ordinals marketplace. So yeah, that's a bit about Bioniq. We're hopefully launching here soon.
Why did you guys choose to build on ICP as opposed to someone like RGB or Rootstock or something else that's sort of like more within the Bitcoin ecosystem at this point?
Yeah, so part of it was that we needed to bridge Bitcoin in because we wanted fast transactions. So we wanted to actually transact on a side chain. Currently, there is no Bitcoin bridge to transact on RGB, meaning if you're going to do any RGB transactions with Bitcoin, you have to do it at the L1, doing like PSBTs with RGB assets in Bitcoin. So you can't do fast Bitcoin transactions excuse me, on RGB unless you go to like Lightning. And if you bridge those assets, if you deposit those assets to Lightning, then it works, except it only works for fungible tokens. And you can't build like a Ordinals marketplace on Lightning. Like it just doesn't really work. There are other options, but you would still have to build bridging infrastructure. And so one of the reasons we decided to build on ICP is it has really great Bitcoin primitives. And so we could build completely at the application layer. We didn't have to touch anything at the protocol layer. And then it's just really fast, 2 to 5 second finality, and there's no gas fees or network fees. So users can do tokenless onboarding essentially, because you're in charge as a developer. When you deploy a smart contract, you cover all the fees. So it's just really great for user experience. That's the main.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. Well, the end goal, of course, is to build something on Bitcoin, is what I take it. And that's why you're so interested in a lot of the L2 ideas. And you've been working on a new website, bitcoinrollups.com, I believe it is. And you've been working on some other stuff adjacent to that. Tell me a little bit about that ambition. I think one thing that I'm seeing right now and really excites me and actually sort of fulfills a thesis I had from a few years ago is that a lot of these projects that we're building on alt chains, we're going to eventually come back to Bitcoin, especially if there was an opcode that would be able to support them. And it seems like that's sort of happening right now, but I'd love to get your take on it.
Yeah, I think there are various examples of companies doing something like this, coming back to build on Bitcoin. For us specifically, we wanted to go, really, really good UX first, and then as the tech progresses, move towards inheriting more and more of Bitcoin security. So some kind of trajectory of like sidechain to sovereign rollup to ZK rollup over the period of the next, I don't know, 5 years or so. That feels like a really natural progression to me. Sidechain because it's ready and available now. You can build on it now. You can get user traction. You can build incredible user experiences. And then sovereign rollups, I know 6 or 7 teams already building sovereign rollups on Bitcoin. Sovereign rollups meaning user verified rollups, not Bitcoin verified rollups, because Bitcoin can't verify the proofs right now. Sovereign rollups are fantastic, and you get it's essentially a true layer 2 on Bitcoin, except you don't get trustless Bitcoin bridging. That's the key downside to sovereign rollups. Unless we get a new opcode, I think there's an opcode that could enable trustless bridging on sovereign rollups, or maybe like BitVM, you get some kind of trust minimized bridge. And then longer term, if we can actually get some, maybe like a generic ZK verifier via some kind of more substantial Bitcoin upgrade, then you can have true layer 2s on Bitcoin.
What's your take on like the general landscape for adoption of one of these things? And I think this kind of goes on with what's happening with Lightning right now, where fees have been so high that a lot of people can't open channels. There's been a lot of people complaining and a lot of people realizing for the first time that Lightning's pretty difficult to use in a high fee environment. And a lot of people have just been getting used to, 1 sat per V byte, 2 sat per V byte.
Yes.
Now you can't really open a channel. It's like, I was checking this morning, it's at 70 sats per V byte. And we saw it go like 200 plus over the last few days.
Yep.
So do you think this moment with Lightning is pushing people towards interest in these other opcodes? Is it a flash in the pan? Does it matter? Were people interested beforehand already?
Yeah, I think in the last couple weeks, I've seen more criticism of Lightning from just Bitcoiners in general than I have maybe ever. Lightning has always been kind of the poster child of Bitcoin scaling. It's really nice. Doesn't require any kind of Bitcoin upgrade. You can create, channels. You can route things through different parties, even like Taproot assets. Focusing on stable coins, integrates natively with Lightning. You can even do like multi-hop transactions through with different assets. Like it's really interesting and has a lot of promise, but in terms of scaling, I mean, I just don't think it works. Like you mentioned, the costs to spin up channels in high fee environments is just too much. And so I think, if we take the best of what's happening in Ethereum and bring it back to Bitcoin, I mean, on Ethereum we have like a couple dozen L2s currently being built. I mean, we get a new L2 getting announced every few weeks, it feels like now. And the zero knowledge space is starting to mature to the point where it's probably about time to bring some of that back to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, even yesterday, there's a new L2 that Paradigm and Sustainer Crypto invested in. It's kind of getting bodied online right now because it has native yield on the L2, which is just great. For the Lightning thing, I want to touch on that really quickly. What do you think the end game is for Lightning based on what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think that if you have another party and you transact with that you transact with all the time, then you could use Lightning for that. Or even if you could build a small economy of sorts, where like person A transacts with person B, who transacts with person C, who transacts with person D, who transacts with person E, and then back to person A. If you have some kind of ecosystem of transactions that happens, then you don't have to worry about reaching channel limits or having to spin up new channels, because you have this like enclosed economy of like bartering almost, where you can use Lightning really effectively. But if you have like a single point that like goes out to a whole bunch of people, or you have a whole bunch of people that come into a single point, I mean, there are lots of if you look at the flow of money, there are lots of patterns that just don't work very well on Lightning in high fee environments due to the costs of spinning up new channels or like going over channel limits.
Gotcha. And that kind of moves us over to talk about some of these other ideas that are out there. And I bet that most people listening to this show are pretty familiar with it, because we do stuff every few months on this sort of topic. But regardless, let's do like a quick overview of some of the sort of options that are out there for other scaling ideas. There's covenants, there's rollups, there's RGB, things like that. But yeah, if you'd be willing to give like a quick overview of some of the ideas that are out there, and then we'll get into some of the more specific ones. I think rollups for this show would be the one to probably land on, or maybe BitVM.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of broad categories here, and don't get hung up on the category names. It's just a grouping of similar technologies. I would say there's sidechains. Sidechains means it's a separate blockchain, separate consensus mechanism, completely distinct from Bitcoin, and you can bridge your Bitcoin over to a sidechain. So examples of sidechain would be like ICP. That's what we're building Bioniq on. It would be Stacks. It would be Rootstock. It would be Liquid. It would be anything that has this separate consensus mechanism. Then you also have meta protocols. Meta protocols use Bitcoin as a data availability layer, but they offload essentially all the compute and the indexing off chain. So this would be like Ordinals, BRC20, RGB, Omni, stamps, counterparty. These leverage data as a full data availability layer in most cases, and then they have off-chain indexing to establish the state of the current meta protocol. Meta protocols are actually very similar to sovereign rollups in a lot of ways because of the way that they work. Then I think we have we'll say rollups, ZK rollups, sovereign rollups, optimistic rollups. I know some people, the space is getting pretty diverse. Some people are building like, imagine an optimistic rollup on Ethereum, but then supercharge it with Bitcoin features. And now you have it's basically a Bitcoin sidechain that's an optimistic rollup on Ethereum, which is interesting. And so rollups is another category where you essentially have some kind of sequencer that collects all the transactions, orders them, then you send it off to a prover, and the prover essentially generates a proof and then stores all of those inputs and the proof on your data availability layer, which is generally Bitcoin in this case. Although there are arguments that for greater scale, you could put your data availability layer anywhere. Let's see, did I miss any? Well, you have like Lightning. Lightning's like a true L2 state channel based, which is also an interesting solution. Taproot assets, things like that. Those are probably like the broad categories of layers on Bitcoin right now.
Yeah, it feels like we're trying to solve two problems here. One, like the scaling issue. We want more people to use Bitcoin with similar or the same or even maybe even better trust assumptions than the Bitcoin L1. So that's one idea with it. Another part of it is like adding more assets. So a lot of people want more assets on top of Bitcoin. And we can see that in Ethereum, they have a proliferation of assets, not only in the base layer, but you're able to use those assets on the next layer up, or even put assets natively into L2 by deploying those contracts there. And a lot of people obviously want that for Bitcoin as well. Stablecoins running on top of Bitcoin, some people might not like that, but it would obviously be a huge use case and probably bring more people to interact with Bitcoin wallets and using the underlying asset, Bitcoin itself. From here, what are some things that you're kind of looking at and being like, this is what we like, this is what we want to work on? Assuming as like an Ordinals marketplace, pretty bullish on that as well. But you're also building out like this Rollups on Bitcoin.com. Tell me a little bit about that and how you're kind of thinking about like filling out not only that website, but bring people into the ecosystem of like understanding how these things work.
Yeah, so if you're interested in following along, I'm collaborating with it's the Bitcoin Rollups Twitter handle. So if you want to, it's just at Bitcoin Rollups, you should go follow them. I believe they just put together their initial kind of first pass on the site. So really interesting work there. Kind of a concrete classification, kind of building on John Light's Bitcoin Rollups research from a year or two ago. And so I've been very interested in just Bitcoin layers generally for the last 6 months or so. Put out quite a bit of content on all kinds of Bitcoin layers and the trade-offs that people are making. It's really a game of trade-offs. How much security do you want to inherit from Bitcoin, or can you inherit? How much programmability can you add on top? Smart contracts, and programming languages, and then what kind of functionality can you add to Bitcoin itself, and then obviously Bitcoin bridging, trust assumptions, and things like that. So I think that part of the reason why we're seeing this renewed excitement around Bitcoin over the last 10, 11 months is that Ordinals really showed the power of layers on Bitcoin. Ordinals is a meta protocol meaning it uses Bitcoin as a full data availability layer and then has like an off-chain indexer. And the indexer essentially scans the chain and then gives you your ordinal state. So who owns which ordinal and which address. And that's, I think, part of the innovation here is with meta protocols and by extension, sovereign rollups, you can do a lot on Bitcoin right now without any new opcodes, without an upgrade.
So we saw a few things pop up recently. The biggest one being BitVM, like this idea that we can have like Turing complete Bitcoin. I put like air quotes there, but the idea is like we can do more with Bitcoin. We can run general compute on top of Bitcoin. It's not sexy or efficient or sleek as of now, but the fact that there's some sort of programmability there is like a huge win. What are you thinking about with BitVM, and what are you thinking about in terms of Lightning? It feels like BitVM would be awesome. Lightning's great, but it feels like we're kind of stuck. If you had a magic wand, where would you kind of see us going over the next 6 to 18 months in terms of Bitcoin development?
Yeah. BitVM is very exciting, and I think it's almost like a pivotal change in the history of Bitcoin. Like you can't unsee BitVM now that it's been released. And so every new opcode discussion that's going to happen when upgrading Bitcoin, you have to discuss it in the context of BitVM. BitVM has to be part of the discussion because it's such a revolutionary idea to be able to compute anything on Bitcoin. There are some limitations to BitVM, so which is totally expected. I mean, this is early days for BitVM. If I had to go to like a logical conclusion for BitVM in the near term, maybe like in a year, I think we will probably get better Bitcoin bridging. By better Bitcoin bridging, I mean single prover, multiple verifier model where you only need a single verifier to be honest. So most Bitcoin bridges right now use some kind of honest majority assumption, where you have like a multi-sig of like 19 people and you require at least honest majority. In the BitVM bridge case, it's likely that you would just need a single verifier out of all of the verifiers, to be honest. And there's a chance that you could be the verifier yourself. In which case, as long as you're ensuring that the prover is being honest, then you have pretty good trust assumptions there. It's basically your best trust minimized Bitcoin bridge with a single prover multiple verifier model. So that's what I'm most optimistic for regarding BitVM over the near term.
Let's talk about this in terms of Bitcoin mining. I think the biggest things that I've seen recently is a lot of Bitcoin miners are looking at some of the L2 ideas, and they're like, kind of nice to have more fees. And they're really liking these Bitcoin fees right now going to halving. So I think they're encouraged by that. At the same time, there's years of technical discussions that a lot of Bitcoin miners have not been a part of because they're more interested in ASICs and energy and all that side of the industry. What would you, if you were giving a talk to a bunch of miners, what would you tell them to pay attention to or sort of pick up first? And let's get into some like the implications for Bitcoin mining after that.
Yeah, I think one trend to look for is the partnerships that we'll see between rollups and mining pools. Mining pools essentially have block production, and rollups need consistent, reliable block production for their rollups. And in many cases, they might have a single transaction that has 10,000 rollup transactions inside of it, and they just want to put it on a block. It might be a 2 megabyte or it might be a 3 megabyte transaction, and they have the fees, the L2 fees to pay for the block space, and they just need a partner that's gonna not give them some 400 kilobyte mempool propagation limit and is just going to include the transaction directly in a block. And so I think there are lots of opportunities here for mining pools and rollups like sovereign rollups or in the future ZK rollups to partner, because it just makes sense. You need reliable block production and mining pools can provide it. And there's some kind of, happy synergy there that happens. And so I think that's one area to look out for. I think another one is, a lot of people are doing crazy things like rare sats, uncommon sats. The first sat mined in every block is an uncommon. Uncommons go for a couple $100 probably right now, maybe a little less.
And there was one that went for like 3.5 Bitcoin recently, right? It was a crazy one that went for so much from
a rare
sat.
Yep.
Okay. I'm still learning how they like notch them down on every single one.
It's basically just the first sat in a block or the first sat in a difficulty adjustment period or the first sat after a halving or the first sat of all time. And so I think rare is the first sat of a halving, perhaps. Gotcha. It might not be. It might be. Yeah, anyway, there are a number of them. It's always the first sat of the block, just depends on how special the time period is.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of like Bitcoin fees, like we've seen Ethereum validators and Ethereum miners before that really like make out like bandits during high fee environments. And a lot of that had to do with just how Ethereum was structured, and there was more applications on top of Ethereum. But the implications for adding more layers means that you're adding more throughput, which means that you're adding more transactions and more applications and all that kind of stuff, also base layer. And I think Bitcoin miners are starting to wake up to that and be like, hey, like if we do have L2s on top of Bitcoin, more than just Lightning or more than just Lightning assets, then we can really have a more robust fee economy. How do you think that sort of plays out in different scenarios? So if we have a roll-up space model, what would that look like? If we went towards something else, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think there are interesting opportunities here for miners to get involved in the layer 2 space. If you think about layer 2s, there are different kinds of layers that you might want to create, and some drive fees and some do not. Like meta protocols currently, like you don't get fees for running a meta protocol indexer. There's an argument that you probably should, because you want to decentralize the kind of off-chain indexing component. And most meta protocols are kind of centralized right now because of that, because there's no incentive to run the indexer. But if you could add in some kind of incentive structure in a good way, then there could be additional fee opportunities for just running software on top, or next to your mining software, where you could capture new fees from indexing meta protocols, assuming that there are appropriate fee structures in place. I think this is similar to like running. You could imagine running a node as a mining pool, or running a network of nodes as a mining pool, and that network of nodes could be nodes offering like compute and hosting and storage, kind of like AWS, but basically just like a more decentralized network that can then power some of these other layer two things on Bitcoin. And so I think there's opportunities there for miner based node driven layer twos, essentially, where you have miners not just mining but also hosting, running nodes for protocols, basically.
Do you see any like negative implications for that? Like, would that increase miner centralization? Would that lead to a disparity in, or that lead to problems with pools, where pools have too much power over like block production? I know with drive chains, we've talked about that a little bit on this show. And then also it's obviously on Twitter a lot about discussions around how MEV would come to Bitcoin. Any thoughts on that? And it's kind of funny how this is like coming up right now with like Lightning, like the frustrations they can't open a channel, so it's not like really usable. But the alternatives obviously also have pretty massive downsides, just depending on how you build out an architecture for an L2.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think that this does have interesting implications for Bitcoin security. I think as miners look for additional fee revenues, I think you start to twist the incentive structure a little bit for miners, where it's not just about mining the next block and getting the reward and getting the fees, but it's also about how can they maximize revenue from the sats in their block. And I mean, we're already seeing MEV on Bitcoin. If you saw the BRC20 deploy, I don't know what to call it, but basically it just RBFs, or like beats out any BRC20 in the mempool. So we're already seeing MEV on. Yeah, that's so fun. Yeah, exactly. We're already seeing MEV, and as that continues to increase, I think there are risks that we start to see different incentives for miners that could compromise Bitcoin security as a whole, perhaps. I'm just wildly speculating here, but as you start to get different incentive structures, as miners start to get fees and revenue from the layer two ecosystem, we might see some additional risks from this happening.
I think that's for the reason that drive chains, discussion on drive chains slowed down pretty quickly. And it was a hot moment there for like 4 to 8 weeks where it was like the only thing people were talking about. But I did see like a lot of Bitcoin miners come out. There's one specific op-ed talking about this where they were concerned about the unknown unknowns and what that could potentially do to Bitcoin. And I'm curious about that in the context of perhaps moving towards a roll-up. That does seem to be like one of the best ways forward for Bitcoin in terms of building a scaling or a throughput solution, because we do see that right now with Ethereum. Like, we kind of know what the downsides are because we've seen it. We know what the upsides are because we're seeing it. From a Bitcoin mining perspective, what would you think about with rollups? What would be some potential issues you could see popping up?
Yeah, so I think you really Shinobi wrote a great article about this in BTC Magazine, talking about the risks of certain kinds of rollups, specifically rollups where miners actually are kind of part of the rollup architecture, meaning that they could withhold funds and refuse to actually mine transactions. And if miners have control, imagine some kind of centralized sequencer that's miner controlled, for example. In that case, the miner could actually prevent people from pegging out, from going back to the layer one. They could censor transactions. That gives miners quite a lot of power. In like a decentralized sequencer environment, though, which most rollups are striving for, you're not going to have any of these kinds of issues, because theoretically, sequencers can really just censor your transactions. So, transactions come in and they order them. And so I think a rollup is a really fantastic path forward for Bitcoin. Like, in 5 years or 10 years or however long it takes us to get another Bitcoin upgrade, maybe a couple years. If we can get some kind of, well, it's not without risks as well. Making Bitcoin more capable has risks as well. And we need to make Bitcoin more capable if it's going to verify proofs. But once you can verify proofs, you get something like a 20x improvement in throughput and cost, just going from Bitcoin transactions to rollups or meta protocol transactions to rollups, and you essentially inherit the full security of Bitcoin with the ZK rollup. You have proofs. Bitcoin verifies the proofs. You have the full decentralization and security of Bitcoin. And so there's the downside is zero knowledge tech is very complicated, and people have found bugs in common libraries that everyone is using, and that could potentially compromise systems. And so it's not a silver bullet, like it's not all sunshine and rainbows here with rollups, but I think there's likely a ZK future on Bitcoin, and I mean, like we're seeing on Ethereum, like I think that's the best opportunity on Ethereum for scaling as well. You have the zero knowledge, really pushing forward, and then once you implement ZK proofs, then you have to start worrying about storage costs, which is what we're seeing on Ethereum right now. EIP 4844 is proto-dink sharding. They're trying to create cheaper storage space for rollups. And I think that's likely a trend that we start seeing on Bitcoin as well. Like maybe the witness data isn't cheap enough for these rollups that want to store data. So maybe there's a temporary witness data space that gets created, and you only hold it for a month or 2 months, and then everyone prunes it because it's just standard practice. Something like that could give us even more throughput and scaling, or at least cost benefits on rollup transactions.
A few thoughts I have on this specifically is, one, on Ethereum, we have a lot of different rollup designs, and they're all, for the most part, like not decentralized or built out. So that's a concern. And two, they can't speak to each other. There's no like real bridging between rollups. And there was ideas in like the early days of rollups, like 2019, 2020, like maybe we can get these rollups to speak to each other. And there's a lot of research poured into that, but like nothing really substantial came about. And to my knowledge, that hasn't really been solved. So you basically have all this liquidity that gets stored on a rollup, and you can think of an L2 having a DeFi application or an NFT marketplace or a stable coin built on top of it. But that rollup can't talk to the rollup next to it. And the best chance you have for helping that liquidity out is maybe just like an Oracle-based system, but it's still like all that liquidity is stored on that rollup. For Bitcoin and for Bitcoiners, I would imagine they wouldn't really want to deal with that, right? They would want to have like one rollup for Bitcoin that everyone uses, so that there's just the same liquidity, there's no problems, there's no issues between all these different rollups. But if you create a opcode and you allows you to verify a ZK rollup or something like that, then anyone can deploy one. Would you have concerns about that, or is that like a larger concern for researchers that we get a permissionless launching of just many rollups out there, and that could compromise sort of the key benefits of having an L2?
Yeah, I think this is a problem that people are trying to solve. In the Polygon ecosystem, Polygon 2.0, they talk about atomic swaps between their supernets. A supernet is essentially a rollup. So every supernet is a different rollup, and they talk about atomic swaps between those. And so lots of people are talking about solutions to this, liquidity problem. This is the Polygon 2.0 solution is only within the Polygon ecosystem. Only with their supernets do they have interoperability. And this is one of the downsides of layer twos, that you get liquidity fragmentation across your layers. And so, between there's kind of a modularity thesis for scaling blockchains, which is, let's use Ethereum or Bitcoin as a settlement layer. Let's have a rollup layer that has kind of a sequencer improver, You could even split that up further, like with Celestia that recently launched. Celestia is just like a transaction ordering plus data availability layer. No consensus layer at all. It's not really a blockchain in that sense. It's just meant to plug in this rollup stack. So you have, Celestia, which is your sequencer transaction orderer, that can then interact with some kind of prover and some kind of settlement layer, and then you have kind of a modular blockchain stack. But there are limitations to the modular blockchain stack. Like you mentioned, you lose some interoperability between different implementations and different ways of creating the rollup. And so some people argue for a monolithic, just take the monolithic approach. You can do, like, imagine if instead of a generic ZK verifier, we just, I don't know, made Bitcoin better. Let's just make Bitcoin script more performant. Let's add a whole bunch of new cool opcodes to do cool things in Bitcoin. Let's there are ways to upgrade Bitcoin for scaling and for smart contracts and for programmability that don't add the ZK verifier opcode essentially. So we could just make Bitcoin better. Or there's the other scaling approach where, use side chains because that's what they're made for. Like, go out and do crazy things, and it's not going to impact Bitcoin as much as it would if we tried to do it natively on Bitcoin itself. So I think we're kind of all in this together, trying to figure out, how do we grow blockchain for for the world.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start wrapping up the conversation. For your perspective right now, what side of the debate do you kind of take as being more interesting to you? It seems like the rollup side is more interesting to you as of now, but obviously, like, the rollup side involves perhaps more complexity, but then you do have the ability to perhaps minimize any sort of downsides for like the base layer, which is a nice add-on. But if you start adding some of these opcodes, then you get things that you don't quite know about. But yeah, where do you land on that so far?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Zero knowledge is definitely the hot thing. Especially like, ETH Denver last year when I was there, it was all about ZK. And, we're seeing a lot of L2s on Ethereum. We're seeing lots of people raising money for L2s on Bitcoin. And so I think rollups have a lot of traction in terms of mind share in the crypto space, as well as investors kind of understanding the layer two play well enough to put money in, and even on Bitcoin. And so I think rollups definitely have traction, but they don't come without problems. There's still lots of problems to solve. Even if we upgrade Bitcoin with a generic ZK verifier, we still have lots of problems to solve. Even when we have a layer two on Bitcoin that's fully functional, it's not going to be like, the end all be all scaling solution. It's going to have limitations. It's going to have costs. It's going to probably twist some of the existing incentive structures. And, we're going to have to go from there and see what we can build on top. So, yeah, I'm definitely excited about BitVM. Definitely excited about rollup, sovereign rollup, ZK rollups. And yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens in the future.
Are there any opcodes you're like, that one might sneak through in the near future?
I know Robin's the creator of BitVM, has really been fighting for OpCat. I know some others that really want to get something like CTV or Covenants, simple implementation of that. I know others that really want some kind of simple way to enable sovereign rollups to have trustless bridging. I think you only need a single opcode for that. Those are probably the top three opcodes that are kind of in the running in my book right now.
Okay. Yeah. Last thought here from myself is just interesting to see the CTV debate was just pretty tough. Coming up on 2 years ago, a little more than that, a little more than a year ago. And now we're coming back and people are like interested in it and kind of pushing in for it. And to me, it does seem like there's a lot of different scaling ideas out there. We have a lot of different champions for it. And each one is kind of being a meat shield momentarily until we get to some sort of opcode. So like, it feels like Drive Chains was kind of a meat shield for a minute. Now the Taproot Wizards might be one for a little bit. And then maybe we'll get to some sort of opcode. And I'm wondering how that kind of plays out for all these different teams, because obviously some are raising, some have like put their stake and reputation on it, but there's probably only going to be like one solution for all these things, or one thing that's decided upon. Maybe you get something that has like a little bit more abstraction to it, so you're able to deploy different implementations. But like the Taproot Wizards, for example, just raised 7.5 million for their idea.
Yep.
Drive Chains has raised like 3 million for their idea. How do you think that plays out? Do you think that people would kind of come to their senses and be like, you know what, that's fair. I'm glad like we have something at least change for Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think in the Taproot Wizards case, I mean, they can build everything that they're going to build, and they're not relying on an opcode. Right now you can build a full sovereign rollup on Bitcoin, and you can build a bridge. You just build some regular old honest majority bridge, and you have your sovereign rollup. And it's not, the world's perfect rollup, but it is completely functional and gives you a lot of benefits on top of Bitcoin and Meta protocols right now. So, they're not like locked in, if we never get an opcode, like I think they're still going to be okay. It's going to be, I don't know the specifics on everything that they're working on, but it's probably something in that direction. On the Drive Chain side, it feels a little bit more risky in terms of the need for an opcode. At least from my perspective. I mean, I could be misinformed there, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely speculative investment happening on Bitcoin right now, and the future is probably going to be wild and crazy, and who knows what's going to happen.
I love to hear that. No, I love to hear that. That's what I've been waiting for. Bob, thank you so much for joining the Mining Pod. Where can people find you and what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm at Bob Bodily on Twitter, and you can follow me. I do lots of deep dives on layers on Bitcoin, and also building Bioniq, which is our fast and easy to use Ordinals marketplace.
Awesome. Well, we'll talk again with you soon, I'm sure, just in the future. Thanks again for joining the show, and thanks for walking us through all that. Talk soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.